Chapter 1. The Servant's Secret. Ilara didn't know that the Alpha King who summoned her to his chambers was about to change her life forever. She didn't know that her abusive ex Marcus had just returned to the kingdom, asking questions about his woman in every tavern and inn, and she certainly didn't know that tomorrow's political marriage would become something far more dangerous than any arrangement between kingdoms. She stood before the massive oak doors of the royal chambers, her borrowed servant's dress suddenly feeling more inadequate than ever. The golden thread embroidery on the door handles seemed to mock her. Everything here was precious, permanent, while she was temporary, replaceable. A knock echoed from within. "Enter!" The voice was deep, commanding in a way that made something in her chest flutter with an emotion she couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Ilara pushed open the doors with hands that trembled only slightly, proud of that small victory over her body's betrayal. Alpha King Damon stood silhouetted against the window, his broad shoulders outlined by the dying sunlight. He was larger than she remembered from a distance, more real somehow. When he turned, his amber eyes found hers immediately, and the air left her lungs in a rush she hoped he didn't notice. "You came," he said, and there was something like relief in his voice that she didn't understand. "You summoned me, Your Majesty." She kept her eyes down, focusing on the intricate patterns in the carpet beneath her feet. Safe ground, familiar territory. "Look at me." The words weren't harsh, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. Ilara's head lifted before she could stop herself, and she found herself trapped in his gaze. Gold and amber, like liquid sunlight, like the warmth she'd forgotten existed. "What's your name?" he asked, though she was certain he already knew. Kings didn't summon servants without knowing their names. "Ilara Mills, Your Majesty. I work in the kitchens." "I know where you work." He moved closer, and she caught the scent of cedar and something wild, something that made her think of forests and safety she'd never known. "I know you arrived here 3 years ago with nothing. I know you worked twice as hard as anyone else and never asked for anything." Heat crept up her neck. He'd been watching her. "Why?" "I don't understand why you've summoned me, Your Majesty." "The marriage alliance with the Northern Territories requires a bride." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. "I need a wife." Ilara's breath caught. Everyone knew about the political necessity, the pressure from the council. "Of course, Your Majesty. I'm sure there are many suitable—" "You." The single word stopped her mid-sentence. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry?" "You," he repeated, stepping close enough that she could see the golden flecks in his eyes. "I want you." "That's impossible." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and she immediately took a step back. "I mean, Your Majesty, I'm nobody. I'm a servant. I don't even—" "You're perfect." Something in her chest pulled tight, a sensation she'd never experienced before. Like a golden thread had been tugged, connecting her to him across the small distance between them. Dangerous. Everything about this was dangerous. "I can't," she whispered, and the words tasted like ashes in her mouth. I wouldn't know how to be." "You don't have to know anything," he said, and his voice had gentled into something that made her want to cry. "Just say yes." Ilara's mind raced. Marcus, her past, the bruises that had finally faded, the fear that hadn't. If she became queen, she'd be visible, public. He would find her eventually. He'd promised he would, the last time she'd tried to leave. But looking at the Alpha King, at the way he watched her like she was something precious instead of something broken, she felt a flutter of impossible hope. "Why?" she asked, his mouth curved into the smallest smile. "Because the moment I saw you, I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were mine." The words should have terrified her. With Marcus, possessive words had been threats, promises of pain and control. But when Damon said them, they felt like safety, like coming home after years of being lost. I need time to think, she managed. Of course. He moved to his desk, pulled out a small velvet box. But while you think, I want you to have this. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a stone that caught the light and threw it back in golden sparks. Not a political arrangement token. Something chosen. Something that spoke of care. I don't understand, she whispered. You will, he said, and his eyes never left her face. When you're ready, you will. Ilara took the box with hands that shook. The moment her fingers brushed his, heat shot up her arm, spreading through her chest, settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. Mate! The word came from nowhere, from everywhere, from some deep part of her soul she'd thought Marcus had destroyed. She jerked her hand back, clutching the ring box against her chest. I should go, she said quickly. Yes, he agreed, but he didn't move away. Think about it, Ilara. Think about what you want, not what you're afraid of. She nodded, backing toward the door, her legs unsteady. At the threshold she paused. Your Majesty? Damon, he said. Just Damon. Why me, really? His smile was soft, devastating in its gentleness. Because you're everything I never knew I was looking for. Ilara fled. She made it to her tiny servants' quarters before the tears came. Not tears of fear or pain. She'd cried those rivers dry years ago. These were different, dangerous. They tasted like hope, and hope was the one thing she couldn't afford. She sat on her narrow bed, staring at the ring box in her trembling hands. Inside, the stone caught the moonlight streaming through her small window, casting patterns of gold and amber on the walls. Beautiful, impossible, just like the offer itself. In the distance, church bells chimed midnight. Tomorrow she would have to give him an answer. Tomorrow she would have to choose between the safety of invisibility and the terrifying possibility of being seen, of being wanted, of being precious to someone who had the power to protect her from anything, even Marcus, especially Marcus. Ilara closed the box and held it against her heart, where that strange golden thread still hummed with warmth. For the first time in 3 years, she let herself imagine what it might feel like to stay somewhere, to belong to someone who might actually deserve her trust. Dangerous thoughts, beautiful thoughts, impossible thoughts that tasted like freedom. Chapter 2. Unexpected Gentleness. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation that Ilara had never imagined possible. She'd expected to give Damon her answer in the cold light of morning and return to her quiet life in the kitchens. Instead, she found herself swept into a world of silk and ceremony, where her every need was anticipated by servants who treated her with a respect that made her stomach flutter with anxiety. She'd said yes. Standing in his chambers at dawn, still clutching the ring box, she'd whispered the word that changed everything. Damon had smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, and suddenly the impossible felt inevitable. You don't have to do anything, he'd told her that first morning when panic had threatened to drown her. Just let me take care of you. Taking care of her, apparently, meant refusing to let her out of his sight during the wedding preparations. Where she'd expected to be shuffled off to wedding planners and seamstresses, Damon appeared at her side for every decision. What do you think of this one? He asked now, standing behind her as she faced a mirror in the royal dressmaker's chambers. His reflection met her eyes in the glass, and that familiar warmth spread through her chest. The dress was beautiful, ivory silk with delicate beading that caught the light like captured stars. But it was also the most expensive thing she'd ever worn, and the weight of its significance made her feel like an imposter. It's lovely, she said carefully, but perhaps something simpler would be more appropriate for... For what? His hand settled on her shoulders, gentle but firm. For my queen? Queen. The word still didn't feel real. In the mirror she could see the girl she'd always been. Too thin, too plain, too broken. But when Damon looked at her, his eyes held something that made her breath catch. "I don't look like a queen," she whispered. "You look like my queen," he said, and his voice carried absolute certainty. "That's all that matters." The seamstress, who'd been quietly pinning the hem, looked up with tears in her eyes. "Your Majesty has excellent taste," she said to Damon. "She's perfect." Perfect. The word sat strangely in Ilara's chest. Marcus had spent 2 years making sure she knew she was anything but perfect, that she was lucky he tolerated her at all. "Tell me about your family," Damon said later as they walked through the palace gardens. It was evening, and the air carried the scent of jasmine and possibility. Ilara's steps faltered. Family was dangerous territory, full of landmines she'd learned to navigate carefully. "There isn't much to tell. Try me." She glanced at him, surprised by the gentle patience in his voice. They'd settled on a bench beside a fountain, and the sound of water helped steady her nerves. "My parents died when I was 16, she said finally. "Fever took them both within a week. I had no other family, no inheritance. Marcus found me at their funeral." Damon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Marcus?" The name tasted like poison in her mouth, but she forced herself to continue. "He offered me shelter, protection. I thought—" She laughed, but there was no humour in it. "I thought he was being kind." And he wasn't. It wasn't a question. Somehow Damon already understood. "No," she whispered. "He wasn't." For a long moment they sat in silence. Then Damon spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "My parents died too, assassinated when I was 22. He stared at the fountain, and something in his expression made her chest ache. "I know what it feels like to be alone in the world, to have someone offer you shelter and wonder what they'll want in return." Ilara turned to study his profile. What did they want? Submission, my crown, my soul if I'd been foolish enough to give it. His mouth curved in a smile that held no warmth. "I learned to be careful about who I trusted." "Then why do you trust me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight his eyes looked like molten gold. "Because when you look at me, you don't see a crown or a kingdom, you just see me." Something cracked open in her chest. Dangerous, beautiful, terrifying. "I see someone who's too good to be real," she admitted, the words barely audible over the fountain's song. "I'm real," he said, reaching out to touch her cheek. "This is real. What you feel when I touch you, that's real too." The golden thread between them hummed to life, sending warmth spiraling through her body. She leaned into his touch, despite every instinct screaming at her to pull away. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Of me?" "Of this, of hoping." She closed her eyes, unable to meet his gaze. Hope is dangerous when you've learned not to trust it. "Then don't hope," he said, and his thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "Just stay, one day at a time, just stay." Stay. The word wrapped around her heart like a promise. "The wedding is in 3 days," she whispered. "Are you having second thoughts?" She opened her eyes to find him watching her with an expression so gentle it made her want to weep. "Every minute of every hour." "Good," he said, surprising her. "It means you understand what this means, what you mean to me." "What do I mean to you?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. His answer was immediate, certain. "Everything." The word hung between them, heavy with possibility and promise. In the distance a bell chimed the hour, and somewhere in the palace servants continued their preparations for a wedding that still felt like a dream. But here, in the garden with moonlight silver on the water and Damon's hand warm against her skin, Ilara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something beautiful. "There's something else," Damon said, his voice shifting to something more serious. "My security captain mentioned increased activity at the kingdom's borders, people asking questions." Ice formed in her stomach. What kind of questions? About you. Someone's been making inquiries. His eyes never left her face. Do you know who that might be? Marcus. Of course it was Marcus. He'd promised he would find her, no matter where she ran. The golden warmth in her chest flickered like a candle in a storm. "It's him," she said, and her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "He said he'd come for me. He promised." Damon's entire demeanour shifted, and for a moment she glimpsed the Alpha, the king, the predator who ruled a kingdom with an iron will. His eyes went cold, dangerous in a way that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. "Let him come," he said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I've been hoping for the chance to meet him." "You don't understand," she started, but he caught her hands in both of his. "No, you don't understand." His grip was firm, grounding. "You're mine now, under my protection, and I protect what's mine." Mine. The word should have made her flinch, should have brought back memories of Marcus's cruel possessiveness. Instead, it felt like safety, like coming home. "He's dangerous," she whispered. "So am I," Damon replied, and his smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "The difference is I use my danger to protect the people I love." Love. He'd said it so casually, as if it were fact rather than feeling, as if loving her was as natural as breathing. "You barely know me," she protested. "I know you're brave enough to trust me despite your fear. I know you're kind to servants who have nothing to offer you in return. I know you work until your hands bleed because you believe you have to earn your place in the world." His voice gentled. "I know you're nothing like what he told you that you were." Tears pricked at her eyes. How did he see so much? How did he know exactly what wounds needed healing? "What if he ruins everything?" she asked. "What if he comes to the wedding? What if—" "Then he'll learn what happens to men who hurt what belongs to me," Damon said simply. "And you'll learn that you're safe. Finally, truly safe." Safe. The word wrapped around her like armour, like golden thread, like the promise of a future she'd never dared imagine. In the garden, with moonlight painting everything silver, and the man who would be her husband promising to protect her from the monsters of her past, Ilara let herself take the first full breath she'd drawn in years. 3 days. 3 days until she became his queen, his mate, his everything. 3 days until Marcus learned that she was no longer the broken girl he'd left behind. She squeezed Damon's hands, felt the answering pulse of warmth between them, and for the first time in her life, she looked forward to tomorrow. Chapter 3. The Day Before. The morning of her last day as simply Ilara dawned crisp and golden, with autumn light streaming through the palace windows like liquid honey. Tomorrow she would be Queen Ilara, mate to the Alpha King, bound by vows and bonds that would change everything. But today she was still just a girl in borrowed silk, trying to believe she deserved the impossible kindness being offered to her. She found Damon in the royal gardens, as had become their morning ritual. He was sitting beneath an ancient oak tree, and something about the peaceful set of his shoulders made her approach quietly, not wanting to disturb whatever moment of tranquility he'd carved out for himself. "You don't have to sneak up on me," he said, without turning around, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I can feel you coming from halfway across the garden." "Feel me?" She settled beside him on the stone bench he'd had moved beneath the tree specifically for their morning conversations. "The bond," he said simply, as if it explained everything. "It's getting stronger. Every day, every hour we spend together, it pulls tighter." Ilara touched her chest, where that golden thread had taken up permanent residence, humming with constant awareness of his presence. "Is that normal?" "Nothing about this is normal," Damon admitted, turning to study her face in the morning light. "Bonds usually take months to develop, years to reach this intensity. Ours." He shook his head, wonder evident in his expression. "I've never heard of anything like what's between us." The admission should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like validation of the impossible connection that had knocked her off balance from the moment their eyes first met. "Are you afraid of it?" she asked. "Terrified," he said, and his honesty made something in her chest flutter. "But not because I don't want it, because I want it so much that losing it would destroy me." The vulnerability in his voice made her brave enough to reach for his hand. The moment their fingers intertwined, that familiar warmth shot up her arm, settling deep in her bones like sunshine made solid. "Tell me about your fears," he said softly. "Not about Marcus, not about the wedding. Tell me what keeps you awake at night." Ilara stared at their joined hands, his large and strong and scarred from years of sword work, hers small and pale and marked with tiny burns from kitchen accidents. Mismatched, but somehow they fit. "I'm afraid I'll wake up," she whispered. "I'm afraid this is all a dream, and I'll open my eyes to find myself back in that cottage with him, and none of this will have been real." Damon's grip tightened. "What did he do to you?" The question was quiet, but she heard the deadly edge underneath. She'd been dreading this conversation, knowing it would have to come eventually. A king deserved to know what kind of damaged goods he was getting. "He said he loved me," she began, the words tasting like ash. "For the first few months I believed him. He was charming, protective. He said he'd take care of me after my parents died, and I was so grateful to not be alone." A muscle in Damon's jaw twitched, but he remained silent, letting her find her words. "It started small. Comments about my appearance, about how lucky I was that he wanted me when no one else would. Then it was criticism about how I kept house, how I cooked, how I spoke." She forced herself to continue, to give him the truth he deserved. When words stopped working, he used his hands. The temperature around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Ilara glanced at Damon, his eyes had gone molten gold, and she could practically feel the rage radiating off him in waves. "How long?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. 2 years. 2 years of believing I deserved it, that I'd brought it on myself somehow." She lifted her free hand to touch the faint scar above her left eyebrow, a reminder of the last time Marcus had lost his temper. "I finally ran when he broke my ribs. I took nothing but the clothes on my back and walked for 3 days before I reached your kingdom." "And you've been hiding here ever since?" "Yes." The word came out as barely a breath. "I thought I was safe. I thought I'd finally found somewhere he couldn't reach me." Damon was quiet for so long that she began to worry she'd revealed too much, given him too many reasons to reconsider their arrangement. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You are the bravest person I've ever met." The words hit her like a physical blow. "I'm not brave. I ran. I hid." "You survived," he corrected, lifting their joined hands to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You endured 2 years of hell, found the strength to leave, and built a new life from nothing. If that's not courage, I don't know what is." Tears burned behind her eyes. "But I'm still afraid. Even now, even with you, I'm terrified he'll find me and take it all away." "Then let me tell you something about myself," Damon said, shifting to face her fully. "When I was 25, I fell in love with a woman named Isabella. She was kind, intelligent, everything a queen should be. I was planning to propose when I discovered she'd been feeding information about our military to our enemies. Everything between us had been a lie designed to weaken my kingdom." Ilara's breath caught. What happened to her? "She was executed for treason," he said simply. "And for 3 years after that, I trusted no one. I built walls so high that nothing could reach me, convinced that anyone who claimed to care for me had ulterior motives." What changed? His smile was soft, devastating in its tenderness. You who expect nothing from me except basic kindness. You who work yourself to exhaustion because you believe you have to earn your place in the world. You who flinch when people move too quickly but still chose to trust me with your truth. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. "I don't deserve you." "You deserve everything," he said fiercely, reaching up to wipe the tears from her cheeks. "You deserve safety and kindness and love so deep it changes you at a cellular level. You deserve a man who would burn down kingdoms before letting anyone hurt you again." "Is that what you would do?" she asked, half joking, but his response was immediate and serious. Without hesitation. The conviction in his voice made her shiver. This was the Alpha King, the man who ruled with absolute authority, and he was promising to use that power to protect her. It should have been overwhelming. Instead, it felt like coming home. "I love you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Damon went very still. "What did you say?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I know it's too soon. I know you probably don't." He silenced her with a kiss that tasted like forever and felt like salvation. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "I've been in love with you since the moment you walked into my chambers," he said against her lips. "I've just been waiting for you to catch up." Joy bubbled up in her chest, bright and effervescent and more powerful than fear. "Really? Really?" He kissed her again, softer this time, like a promise. "Tomorrow, when we say our vows, they won't be political words. They'll be the truth I've been carrying in my heart." They might have stayed there forever, lost in each other, and the golden warmth of new love acknowledged, if Captain Torres hadn't appeared at the garden entrance, his expression grim. "Your Majesty," he called, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to speak." Damon sighed, pressing one last kiss to Ilara's temple. "Duty calls." "Go," she said, though she didn't want to let him go. "I'll be fine." "Stay in the palace," he said, suddenly serious. "Don't go anywhere alone." The captain's news was written all over his face, and Ilara's stomach dropped like a stone. "He's here, isn't he, Marcus?" "We believe so," Torres confirmed grimly. "Someone matching his description was spotted in the village this morning, asking about tomorrow's ceremony, specifically asking about the bride." Ice flooded Ilara's veins, but before the familiar panic could take hold, Damon's hand found hers again. "How many men do we have on the perimeter?" Damon asked, his voice shifting into command mode. 50, Your Majesty, and we've tripled security around the palace." "Good. Double it again." Damon's eyes never left the captain's face. "And I want this man found and brought to me, alive if possible, but I'm not particular about his condition when he arrives." "Yes, Your Majesty." After the captain left, Damon turned back to Ilara, his expression gentle despite the steel underneath. "Are you all right?" Ilara took inventory of her feelings, surprised to discover that while she was afraid, it wasn't the paralyzing terror she'd expected. Instead, there was something else there, something that felt almost like anticipation. "I think so," she said slowly. I think I'm tired of running from him." "You don't have to run any more," Damon said, pulling her against his chest. "You never have to run from anyone again." She buried her face against his shoulder, breathing in his scent of cedar and safety. Tomorrow she would marry this man. Tomorrow she would become his queen and his mate. And if Marcus wanted to try to stop it, let him come. She was no longer the broken girl who'd fled into the night 3 years ago. She was about to become the Alpha King's mate, and she had finally found something worth fighting for. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said against his chest, "I want you to know that these past few days have been the happiest of my life." "Tomorrow is just the beginning," Damon promised, his arms tightening around her. "We have forever ahead of us." Forever. The word wrapped around her heart like armour, like hope, like the golden thread that bound them together across space and time and all the broken pieces of their pasts. Let Marcus come. She was ready for him now. She was ready for everything. Chapter 4. Perfect Timing. The cathedral bells rang across the kingdom like a symphony of hope, their bronze voices carrying the news that had been whispered in every corner of the realm for days. Their Alpha King was finally taking a queen. Ilara stood before the mirror in her bridal chambers, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and golden thread, the beading catching the morning light and throwing it back in patterns that reminded her of the bond humming constantly in her chest. Her hair had been swept up in an elaborate style that made her neck look elegant rather than fragile, and the circlet of diamonds resting on her brow caught the light like captured stars. She looked like a queen. More than that, she felt like one. "You're radiant, Your Majesty," said Lady Catherine, the royal dresser who had become something of a friend over the past few days. "The Alpha King won't be able to take his eyes off you." Ilara smiled, touching the simple gold band that would soon be joined by its matching wedding ring. Through the bond, she could feel Damon's presence somewhere in the palace, steady and warm, and absolutely certain. Whatever happened today, whatever Marcus tried to do, she wasn't facing it alone. "Are you ready?" Lady Catherine asked gently. Ilara took one last look at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the terrified servant who had stumbled into the palace 3 years ago. This woman had fire in her eyes and steel in her spine. This woman was about to marry the love of her life and claim her place as queen. "Yes," she said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. "I'm ready." The procession to the cathedral was a blur of cheering crowds and flower petals thrown like blessings. Ilara rode in the royal carriage, waving to subjects who already looked at her with love and acceptance that took her breath away. Through the bond, she could feel Damon's pride, his joy, his overwhelming love wrapping around her like armour against any doubt. The cathedral was magnificent, its soaring arches filled with nobility from across the kingdom and beyond. But Ilara only had eyes for the man waiting for her at the altar. Damon stood tall and regal in his ceremonial uniform, but when their eyes met across the crowded space, she saw only the man who had promised to love and protect her forever. The walk down the aisle felt like walking through a dream. Every step brought her closer to the future she'd never dared imagine, closer to the man who had shown her what real love looked like. The golden thread between them pulled tighter with each step, until she could barely tell where her heartbeat ended and his began. When she finally reached the altar, Damon took her hands in his, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. His eyes held wonder, love, and something deeper, a recognition that spoke to the very core of her soul. "You're beautiful," he murmured, so softly only she could hear. "You're mine," she whispered back, and his smile was like sunrise. The ceremony began with words as old as the kingdom itself, vows that bound not just lives but souls. Ilara had memorized her responses, but when the moment came, she spoke from her heart instead. "I, Ilara, take you, Damon, not just as my husband and my king, but as my mate, my anchor, my home. I promise to stand with you through whatever storms may come, to trust in the bond that brought us together, and to love you with everything I am for all the days of my life." Tears gathered in Damon's eyes, and she could feel his emotions through the bond. Overwhelming love, fierce protectiveness, and a joy so pure it took her breath away. "I, Damon, take you, Ilara, not just as my wife and my queen, but as my mate, my heart, my everything. I promise to protect you, to cherish you, to show you every day that you are worthy of all the love in the world. I promise to be the man you deserve, and to love you beyond the boundaries of this life and into whatever comes after." The priest raised his hands to speak the final blessing, and Ilara felt her heart soar with impossible happiness. They were seconds away from being bound forever, seconds away from... The cathedral doors burst open with a crash that echoed off the stone walls like thunder. Every head turned toward the sound, and Ilara's blood turned to ice in her veins. She knew that silhouette, knew the swagger and the cruel set of those shoulders even before he stepped into the light. Marcus. He strode down the aisle like he owned it, his presence a dark stain on the golden joy of the moment. He was exactly as she remembered, handsome in a way that masked the cruelty underneath, charming when it suited him, dangerous when it didn't. "Stop this farce," he called out, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "That woman belongs to me." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Ilara felt something unexpected flood through her. Not the paralyzing terror she'd expected, but anger. Pure, clean anger that burned away 3 years of fear in an instant. Damon's hands tightened on hers, and when she looked at his face, she was surprised to see not rage, but satisfaction. His mouth curved in a smile that was sharp enough to cut glass. "Perfect timing," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral. "I wanted you to watch." Marcus faltered for a moment, clearly not expecting that response. He'd come here to humiliate her, to drag her back into his world of pain and control. But the man standing beside her was not intimidated by his bluster. "You don't know what you're getting, Your Majesty," Marcus said, recovering his composure with the ease of a practiced manipulator. "She's damaged goods, used, worthless. I threw her away years ago, and now she's trying to trick you into believing she's worth something." Each word was designed to wound, to reduce her to the broken creature he'd tried so hard to create. But instead of crumbling, Ilara felt herself standing taller. These words had no power over her anymore. "She's not for you," Marcus continued, his voice growing more confident as he played to the crowd. "She's a servant and nothing. She has no breeding, no education, no value beyond what a man chooses to give her. And I'm telling you, as the man who knows her best, that she's not worth the trouble." The cathedral was dead silent, every noble and dignitary hanging on every word. Ilara could feel their judgment, their uncertainty, and for a moment the old fear tried to claw its way back up her throat. Then Damon stepped forward, still holding her hand, and when he spoke, his voice carried the absolute authority of a king and the fierce love of a mate. "You're right," he said, and Ilara's heart stopped. "You did know her, past tense, but the woman you're describing, she doesn't exist anymore." He turned to face the crowd, his presence commanding every eye in the cathedral. "Let me tell you about the woman I'm marrying," he continued, his voice ringing off the stone walls. "She's the bravest person I've ever met. She survived 2 years of hell at the hands of a man who tried to break her spirit, and she came through it with her kindness intact. She works harder than anyone in this palace, asks for nothing in return, and treats every person she meets with dignity and respect." Ilara's eyes filled with tears as he spoke, each word a balm to wounds she'd carried for years. "She's intelligent enough to see through political manoeuvring, compassionate enough to care for injured animals, and strong enough to stand here today despite every reason she has to be afraid." Damon's voice grew stronger, more powerful with each word. "She's not just worthy of being my queen, she's the only woman alive who could be." The crowd began to murmur, and Ilara could see the shift in their expressions. Marcus's words had painted her as weak, worthless, but Damon's painted her as heroic. "More than that," Damon continued, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "She's my mate, chosen by fate, blessed by the gods, bound to me by ties that go deeper than law or custom. And if you think I'm going to let some pathetic excuse for a man come into my cathedral and insult my queen, you're about to learn exactly what kind of king you're dealing with." The temperature in the cathedral seemed to drop 10 degrees. Damon's eyes had gone molten gold, and for the first time Ilara saw him not as the gentleman who brought her breakfast in bed, but as the alpha who ruled a kingdom with absolute power. Marcus took an instinctive step backward, finally realizing he'd made a terrible mistake. "She was never yours," Damon said, his voice deadly quiet but carrying to every corner of the cathedral. "She was surviving you. There's a difference, and now she's mine, not because I own her, but because she chose me, because we chose each other, because what we have is real in a way you'll never understand." He gestured to the guards who had been stationed throughout the cathedral, and they began moving toward Marcus with purposeful steps. "You have 10 seconds to leave my kingdom," Damon continued conversationally. "If I ever see your face again, if I ever hear that you've so much as spoken her name, I will personally ensure that you spend the rest of your very short life regretting the day you were born." Marcus looked around the cathedral, finally seeming to realize that he was surrounded by people who would kill him without hesitation if their king gave the word. His face twisted with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over," he snarled at Ilara. "You think you're safe now, but you'll never be anything more than what I made you." "You're wrong," Ilara said, and her voice rang clear and strong through the cathedral. "You made me strong enough to recognize real love when I found it. You made me brave enough to fight for what matters, and you made me wise enough to know the difference between a man and a monster." She stepped forward, still holding Damon's hand, and looked Marcus directly in the eye. "Thank you," she said with perfect sincerity. "Thank you for being so terrible that when I found someone good, I knew enough to hold on tight." Marcus's face went purple with rage, but before he could respond, the guards reached him. They didn't need to use force. The promise of it was enough. He was escorted from the cathedral like the unwelcome pest he was, and as the doors closed behind him, it felt like the final chapter of her old life ending. Damon turned back to her, his eyes soft with pride and love, and something deeper than words could express. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Ilara looked around the cathedral at the faces full of love and acceptance and respect. She looked at the man who had just publicly claimed her as his everything, who had stood between her and her demons without hesitation. "I'm perfect," she said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. The priest, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes, cleared his throat nervously. "Shall we continue with the ceremony, Your Majesty?" Damon smiled, that devastating smile that had first made her forget how to breathe. "By all means," he said. "I have a queen to marry." When they kissed to seal their vows, it tasted like freedom and felt like coming home. The cheers of the crowd washed over them like a blessing, and through the bond, Ilara felt not just Damon's love, but the love of an entire kingdom that had just witnessed her transformation from victim to queen. She was no longer running from her past. She was embracing her future, and it was everything she'd never dared to dream it could be. Chapter 5. Queen's Heart. The wedding reception was a blur of golden light and champagne toasts, of nobles who now looked at her with genuine respect rather than curious speculation. Ilara moved through it all in a daze of happiness, her hand firmly clasped in Damon's, the heavy weight of her new wedding ring, a constant reminder that this was real. She was really married to him. She was really his queen. But more than that, she was his mate. The bond between them had strengthened throughout the ceremony, and now it sang constantly in her veins, a golden thread that connected her to him across any distance. Even when protocol demanded they be separated for different conversations, she could feel him, his steady presence, his overwhelming love, his fierce pride in her. "You handled yourself beautifully today," said Duchess Miranda, one of the few nobles who had always treated her with kindness. "When that dreadful man interrupted the ceremony, I was terrified, but you stood there like you were born to be queen." "Thank you," Ilara said, surprised to discover she meant it. A few hours ago she might have deflected the compliment, insisted she'd only done what anyone would do. Now she let herself accept the praise. She had been magnificent today. She had faced her greatest fear and emerged victorious. She had let Damon defend her, but she had also defended herself. For the first time in her life, she felt truly worthy of the love and respect being offered to her. "The Alpha King hasn't taken his eyes off you all evening," the Duchess continued with a knowing smile. "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Across the ballroom, Damon was deep in conversation with several foreign dignitaries, but as if he could feel her watching him, his eyes found hers immediately. The smile he gave her was soft, intimate, full of promises for later when they would finally be alone. Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading through her limbs like liquid sunshine. The bond pulsed between them, carrying emotions too deep for words. Love, yes, but also gratitude, protectiveness, and something that felt almost like worship. He looked at her like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe was real. "Excuse me," Elara murmured to the Duchess. "I think my husband needs rescuing from trade negotiations." The words felt strange and wonderful in her mouth. My husband, my mate, my king. She made her way across the ballroom, accepting congratulations and well wishes from nobles who had watched her transformation from servant to queen with something approaching awe. When she reached Damon's side, he immediately wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her against him with a possessiveness that would have terrified her months ago, but now felt like safety. "Gentlemen," he said to the dignitaries, "I hope you'll excuse me. I'd like to steal a dance with my wife." Wife. The word sent shivers down her spine every time she heard it. The waltz that followed was magical, a slow, intimate dance that felt like a conversation conducted entirely through touch. Damon held her close, one hand at the small of her back, the other cradling her fingers against his chest. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, as if the bond between them extended to every movement, every breath. "How are you feeling?" he murmured against her ear, his voice so low that only she could hear it. "Like I'm living in a fairy tale," she admitted, "like I'm going to wake up any moment and find out none of this was real." "It's real," he said, spinning her slowly before pulling her back against his chest. "You're real. This is real, and you're never going back to being anything less than exactly what you are, my queen, my mate, my everything." Everything. The word wrapped around her heart like a promise. "I love you," she whispered, still amazed that she could say the words freely, without fear of how they would be received. "I love you too," he replied, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "More than I ever thought possible." They danced through 2 more songs before Damon leaned close again, his voice rough with something that made her pulse quicken. "I think we've fulfilled our social obligations for the evening," he said. "What do you say we retire to our chambers?" Our chambers. Not his chambers or her chambers, but theirs, together. "Yes," she breathed, and felt his arm tighten around her waist. The walk to their chambers felt like it took forever and no time at all. Nobles they passed offered final congratulations, but Elara barely heard them. All her attention was focused on the man beside her, on the promise of privacy and intimacy that awaited them. When the heavy oak doors finally closed behind them, shutting out the rest of the world, Elara felt something in her chest release. Here, in the sanctuary of their private space, she could finally let down the last of her walls. "Come here," Damon said softly, holding out his hand. She went to him without hesitation, let him pull her into his arms in front of the fireplace that cast dancing shadows across the room. For a long moment they simply held each other, breathing in the reality of their new life together. "I keep thinking about what you said today," Elara said against his chest, "about how I was surviving Marcus not belonging to him. I never thought of it that way before." Damon's arms tightened around her. "Because he wanted you to think you belonged to him. Abusers convince their victims that they deserve the treatment they're receiving, that they have no other options. But you always had options, Elara. You always had strength. He just made sure you couldn't see it." "And you made sure I could," she said, tilting her head back to look at him. "You showed me what I was worth." "No," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "I just helped you remember what you already knew. Your worth doesn't come from me or from anyone else. It comes from you. Your kindness, your courage, your incredible capacity to love despite everything you've been through." Tears gathered in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of healing, of finally understanding that she was worthy of love, not because someone else had decided she was, but because love was her birthright as a human being. "The marriage stopped being political for me the moment I saw you," Damon continued, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. I told myself it was just physical attraction at first, then admiration for your strength. But the truth is, I knew from the very beginning that you were my mate. The bond just made it impossible to ignore." "When did you know for certain?" she asked. "The night you told me about Marcus," he said without hesitation. "When you trusted me with your pain, when you let me see your scars and didn't try to hide from my reaction. That's when I knew that what I felt for you went beyond anything I'd ever experienced before." The bond between them pulsed with warmth, carrying emotions too deep and complex for words. Love, yes, but also recognition, completion, the sense that they were two halves of the same whole, finally reunited. "I was so afraid," she confessed. "Afraid that if I let myself love you, he would come and destroy it. And he did come, but—" "But he couldn't destroy anything," Damon finished, "because what we have is stronger than anything he tried to build on fear and control." "He doesn't have any power over me anymore," she realized, the truth of it settling deep in her bones. When he stood there today, trying to make me feel small and worthless, all I could think was how wrong he was, how completely he'd failed to understand who I really am. "And who are you?" Damon asked, his eyes warm with love and pride. Ilara straightened her shoulders, feeling the truth of it resonate through every cell in her body. "I'm Queen Ilara. I'm your mate. I'm a woman who survived hell and came out stronger, who learned to trust again, who chose love over fear." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'm someone who deserves happiness." "Yes, you are," Damon said, and kissed her like he was sealing a vow. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we live," he said simply. "We rule together. We build a life together. We have the kind of love that people write stories about. We heal the parts of ourselves that are still broken, and we help each other become the best versions of ourselves. And if I have nightmares, if I wake up sometimes and forget where I am, then I'll be there," he promised. "I'll be there to remind you that you're safe, that you're loved, that you're home. I'll be there for all of it, the beautiful parts and the difficult parts and everything in between." Home. The word settled around her like a warm embrace. Not a place, but a person. Not safety from the world, but safety to be herself in the world. "I love you," she said again, because the words felt like a prayer, like a celebration, like the most important truth she'd ever spoken. "I love you too," he replied, "forever and always, my queen, my mate, my heart." Outside their windows, the kingdoms celebrated their new queen, but inside their chambers, two hearts that had found each other across all odds finally settled into the rhythm that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Ilara was no longer running from her past. She was building her future, one golden thread at a time, with the man who had shown her that love could heal even the deepest wounds. And for the first time in her life, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Chapter 6. Ever After. 3 months later, Ilara woke to the sensation of warm lips pressing gentle kisses along her shoulder blade. She smiled before she even opened her eyes, the golden thread in her chest humming with contentment as Damon's presence wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. "Good morning, my queen," he murmured against her skin, his voice rough with sleep and affection. "Good morning, my king," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. Even after months of marriage, the sight of him first thing in the morning still made her breath catch. His dark hair was tousled, his amber eyes soft with love, and the smile he gave her was the same one that had first made her forget how to think properly. "Sleep well?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. "Better than I ever have in my life," she said, and meant it completely. The nightmares that had plagued her for years had all but disappeared, replaced by dreams of golden threads and forever promises. When the occasional bad dream did surface, Damon was always there to chase it away with gentle words and protective arms. They had settled into a morning routine that never failed to make her heart sing. Damon would wake first, as alphas were naturally early risers, and spend a few minutes simply watching her sleep with an expression of wonder that made her feel precious beyond measure. Then he would wake her with soft kisses and gentle touches, and they would talk quietly in the grey light of dawn about their plans for the day, about nothing and everything, about the love that grew stronger with each passing moment. "The Council wants to discuss the new trade agreements with the Eastern Kingdoms today," Damon said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare arm. "And you have that meeting with Lady Margaret about the Children's Sanctuary." The Children's Sanctuary was Ilara's project, something she had started almost immediately after becoming queen. It was a safe haven for children who had experienced abuse or neglect, a place where they could heal and learn that they were worthy of love and protection. Working with these children had become her passion, her way of transforming her own painful experiences into something that could help others. "How many new arrivals this week?" Damon asked, because he always asked, always showed interest in the work that meant so much to her. 5, she said, and couldn't keep the sadness out of her voice. 2 sisters whose father was hurting them, and 3 boys whose mother abandoned them with a man who saw them as burdens rather than blessings. Damon's jaw tightened, as it always did when she told him about new children arriving at the sanctuary. His protective instincts extended far beyond just her. He felt personally responsible for every hurt child in his kingdom. "What do they need?" he asked. "The boys need medical attention. They're malnourished, and one has a broken arm that wasn't set properly. The girls just need time and patience and someone to show them that not all men are monsters." "Consider it done," Damon said immediately. "I'll have Dr. Michaels at the sanctuary within the hour, and whatever else they need, make sure they get it." This was why she loved him, why she fell more deeply in love with him every single day. He didn't just support her work, he embraced it, funded it, made it a priority for the entire kingdom. Under their joint rule, the kingdom had become a sanctuary for those who needed protection, a place where the vulnerable were cherished rather than discarded. "Thank you," she said, leaning up to kiss him softly, "for everything, for supporting this, for understanding why it matters to me." "It matters to you, so it matters to me," he said simply. "Besides, those children are our subjects too. They deserve the same protection and care as anyone else in this kingdom." Our subjects. Even after 3 months, the casual way he included her in everything, the way he had seamlessly integrated her into his rule, still took her breath away. She wasn't just a queen in name. She was his true partner, his equal in all things that mattered. "Speaking of which," Damon continued, his expression shifting to something more serious, "I received word yesterday that Lord Blackwood has been asking questions about the sanctuary, specifically about you and your personal investment in the project." Ice formed in Ilara's stomach. Lord Blackwood was one of the few nobles who had never fully accepted her rise to queen, who still whispered about her humble origins and questioned her fitness to rule. She had learned to ignore most of the gossip, but this felt different, more threatening. "What kind of questions?" she asked. "The kind that suggest he's hoping to find something he can use against you," Damon said, his voice going cold in a way that reminded her he was a king who had eliminated threats to his kingdom before. "He seems to think that your work with abused children indicates some kind of instability." Rage flashed through her, bright and clean and righteous. "How dare he—" "Easy," Damon said, pulling her closer against his chest. "I'm not telling you this to upset you. I'm telling you because I want you to know that I'm handling it." "How?" His smile was sharp, dangerous, full of the quiet menace that made even his enemies think twice before crossing him. "Lord Blackwood has been embezzling from the royal treasury for the better part of 2 years. I've been building a case against him for months. I think it's time to present my findings to the full council." Ilara stared at him, torn between admiration and concern. "You've been investigating him?" "I investigate anyone who poses a threat to my queen." Damon said matter-of-factly. "It's part of my job to protect you from all enemies, foreign and domestic." The casual way he said it, as if protecting her was as natural as breathing, made something warm and grateful bloom in her chest. She would never get used to being someone's priority, someone's treasure worth protecting. "I love you," she said, because the words never felt like enough, but they were all she had. "I love you too," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Now, shall we get dressed and go terrify some counsellors with our competence and devotion to each other?" Ilara laughed, a sound that came more easily now than it ever had before. "Let's do it." The day that followed was busy but satisfying. The council meeting went smoothly, with the trade agreements approved unanimously, and Lord Blackwood notably absent after receiving an urgent summons to discuss his financial records with the King's auditors. Ilara's meeting with Lady Margaret was productive, resulting in expanded funding for the sanctuary and plans to open a second location in the Northern Territories. But it was the evening that truly filled her heart with joy. Damon had surprised her with a quiet dinner in their private dining room, just the two of them, and a meal prepared by the royal chef who had become something of a friend over the past months. "To us," Damon said, raising his wineglass as they settled at the intimate table by the window. "To us," Ilara echoed, clinking her glass against his. "To impossible love stories that turned out to be real. To queens who are braver than they know, and kings who are luckier than they deserve," Damon added. "To the future we're building together," Ilara said, her voice soft with emotion. They drank, and then spent the meal talking about everything and nothing, kingdom business and sanctuary plans, and the small domestic details that made up their shared life. When they finished eating, they moved to the sitting area, where a fire crackled in the hearth and soft lamplight cast golden shadows across the room. Ilara curled up against Damon's side on the comfortable sofa, her head on his shoulder, his arms wrapped securely around her. This had become their evening ritual, these quiet moments of connection after busy days of royal duties. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Marrying me instead of someone more politically advantageous?" Damon was quiet for so long that she started to worry she'd voiced a fear she should have kept to herself. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Ilara, look at me." She tilted her head back to meet his eyes, surprised to see tears gathered there. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. "You're the best thing that has ever happened to this kingdom. The nobles respect you, the people adore you, and you've accomplished more good in 3 months than most queens do in decades." "But—" "No buts," he said firmly. "You want to know what I regret? I regret that it took me 28 years to find you. I regret every day I lived before you walked into my life. I regret that you suffered for so long before you came to me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were tears of overwhelming love and gratitude. "But marry you?" Damon continued, wiping her tears away with gentle thumbs. "Choose you, love you. Those are the only decisions I've ever made that I'm completely, absolutely certain about." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and wonder into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I love our life," she whispered. "So do I," he replied, "and this is just the beginning." Outside their window, snow had begun to fall, blanketing the kingdom in pristine white. Inside, by the warmth of the fire, a former servant and her king planned their future together, their love a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark. Ilara thought about the children sleeping safely at the sanctuary, about the kingdom flourishing under their joint rule, about the man holding her who had shown her that fairy tales could come true if you were brave enough to believe in them. She was no longer the broken girl who had fled into the night 3 years ago. She was Queen Ilara, beloved by her people, devoted to her causes, and cherished beyond measure by the man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. And as the snow continued to fall and the fire crackled warmly in the hearth, She knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning of their love story. Where are you listening from? I'd love to meet you in the comments and hear your thoughts about Ilara and Damon's journey from fear to love, from isolation to belonging. If you enjoyed their story and would like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people discover these stories of hope and healing. Thank you for letting me share this tale of second chances and the kind of love that really can conquer all.